All right, we're creating graphics for our website, and the first step is obviously to, well, create it in Spark Post we've been using. I'm going to hit the green plus sign at the bottom here and just dive into creating some new content. I'm going to use the search free photos function. That's always how I like to start my graphics. Use the background image. I've already created a couple graphics for my website as far as some of the choices. I need to go back and I want to create a new graphic for my first chapter, which kind of presents my reader some options off into the woods. So that's what I'm going to search for here. So I'm going to tap on this image here. It's like a nice woods path. Next decision is what size. I've been using the banner size, which is near the end of this list. Wide might work as well. I haven't experimented with that yet, but I'm going to stick with banner for now. The next step is to add some text onto your image. And this is the beginning of my story, so this will be my chapter 1 image. And then maybe a subheading for into the woods. A subheading for kind of what's happening in this particular chapter. You have all kinds of style options for your text, but I'm going to go straight to the style tab at the end. This presents you with a little spinner, and you can roll the dice a couple times and see if you can find a good look for your text box. Last thing I like to do is remove this Adobe Spark watermark at the bottom right. So I tap on that once, and remove the watermark. This looks good. I'm going to click done, and then to save this is the share box at the top. Save image. Next we'll head to REPL and source our image in. Step 2 in the process now is we want to bring our images into our website, of course. So let's look at what we do have already here. I went ahead and swapped out my first image already onto my index page here, which is my home page. So we're trying to figure out how exactly that connection was made in the first place. So what we have here in our index.html file, which you should have made a copy of, that was copy and pasted off of Schoology. If you didn't change it, the second div that you encounter is labeled Div Id Header. So that's the identification for this div area that includes a couple text boxes right now. And that's essentially this area up top of my page that has this text here, chapter 1, Into the Woods, and then I created a custom graphic that goes along with that in my previous portion of this video. So if we know the div ID is called header, that means I can go to my CSS document and locate where this image was sourced from the web. So I'm going to switch down to my style.css document here. And scrolling down a bit, I'm looking for hashtag header. For me, that's on line 57. Yours might be different. You might have to look around a bit for it. But this is the styling for that specific div that I just mentioned, this top section. And as you can see, we have a background image command here, and the URL that's listed is a URL that I copy and pasted from ImageBB, which is where we've been hosting our images, and that's where you'll go to host your image as well. Some other commands in here are a background size that will cover. We've decided that cover works the best here, and then we created a box shadow that creates a shadow around our image that gives it a little more depth. And this curly brace then closes that section of our code. So what we'll need to be doing is essentially duplicating, excuse this, my keyboard's driving me crazy here. But this section of the code, if I can get my cursor to highlight it here. There we go. So this section here, the header section with all of its CSS commands and the curly braces, will need to be duplicated, and then we'll source a new image into that duplication. So the next step is we'll go to ImageBB. This is the website that we've used to host our images. And once you create all your graphics in Spark Post, or maybe you do this one at a time, it just depends on how you want to tackle it, but you will upload your images using ImageBB. So you go into your, let me go back a step to the home page here. So if I click on my username, I can click on my albums, which is the second button down here. If you haven't yet created an album for your website, you could do that right now by clicking on the right side here. It says create new album. I've already made one, so I'm just going to tap it open. And this is my Code Your Own Adventure folder. This is where all the graphics for your website are actually hosted, and you're sourcing them from my album. But we're going to upload images to your album on your iPad and your ImageBB by tapping up near the top right here. It says upload to album. So once you save those images off of Spark Post, you can go into your photo library here and add them all at once. I already have chapter 1 added, so I'm going to add my 2 images for my branching pathways for chapter 2. I don't want to edit or resize anything here, so I'm just going to tap upload. Okay, cool. So we can just leave those put there for now, but eventually what we'll want is not a viewer link, but a direct link to these images. So that will come in handy in a little bit. I don't want them both simultaneously, so I might just close that box out and go back to my album, and I'll come back to each of these specific images in a moment. So going back to my REPL tab now. So here is the trick to get an image sourced onto your next page. So if I go to chapter 2, this HTML file, chapter 2 flashlight.html. This was a website or a subpage that I created earlier. And if you need help linking and creating subpages, view my previous video on how to do that. But I'm assuming you're at a point where you're just looking to add images now. So the tricky part is we have the same div ID here. We still have header. But the trick is we want to add a different image. We don't want this same chapter 1 image to display on all our pages. So we need to create a unique or different div ID is our first step. So I'm going to break into my code here on line 15 where it says div ID header. And I just need to come up with a name that I can remember over to my CSS to code in my image. So I'll explain what that means here as I go. So instead of div ID header, maybe we'll call this div ID chapter 2. And this is my flashlight. So I think I'm going to put that in there as well. That just relates to what's happening in my story. Flashlight header, I guess. So a div ID can be, the ID name can be anything you want it to be. So come up with some name that makes sense for you. And then I'm actually just going to highlight that text with my finger. And then remember with REPL, copy and paste works a little strange. You have to use the functions on the top of your keypad. So I'm going to copy using the icon right next to the scissors there. So I'm going to need that div ID in a moment here. So we've labeled this div ID something else. And now I'm going to go to CSS, my style CSS page, and go right underneath where that header section is And we're going to create a new CSS modifier here. And instead of hashtag header, which is what we used on our simply our first page, we're going to do hashtag. Let's see if you can see where I'm writing here. There we go. So a new CSS modifier hashtag, and then I'm just going to go ahead and paste the name of my div ID that I just created, chapter 2 flashlight header. And then we can, for the most part, copy and paste everything from the header section here, including this curly brace. We still want a box shadow. We still want our background size to cover everything. And we still want a background image. We're just going to change the URL once we get to it. So I'm going to grab all of this text or code from the curly brace to the curly brace for my header section, my original header section. Looks like I got it. I'm going to tap copy on my keyboard and then move down to my new CSS selector for chapter 2 and paste it in here. Now I'm most of the way there, except I need to now swap out the web address for my new image. That's our last step. So I'm going to get rid of the web link to my chapter 1 image by getting rid of all this green text. I still need that parentheses because that's where my URL is going to go. And where I get that URL is now from my image BB site. So I'm going to switch over to that tab again. And since this is my flashlight chapter here, this will be the image I want for that. So it displays my image here. To get the image URL, I have to tap on the image itself. Well, there's a couple ways, I guess. I could hit the share embed codes, that's to the right here. Hopefully you saw that little icon I just created. Whoops. When I tapped on it, go back. So I tap once, it pulls up some options. There's a little share box, it looks like, for embed codes. We don't want a viewer link, we want a direct link to our image. So it's going to be this ibb.co and then some big nasty looking URL with probably PNG at the end. That's an image file. So we're going to copy that, just tapping copy from image BB here, and then go back to REPL. Make sure we're in those parentheses and paste that image in there. Chapter 2, flashlight header. So now if I were to test out my site, what I should have is chapter 1's got its own specific image. And when then I click on grab a flashlight, that takes me to my second subpage. And it's now swapped out that image with my second image for chapter 2. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Let's do another speed run through that here at the end of the video and see if I can get in. I made another image for my chapter 2 matches. Well, that was my first choice for my reader. Do you want to grab matches or flashlights? So I did my flashlights already. Let's do matches real quick. So speed running through it, we need to change the div ID to something unique for this for this page. So I'm going to call this chapter 2 matches header. Kind of an ugly name, but it'll work. I'm going to need that name in a moment here, so I'm just going to work smarter, not harder, and copy that. And then I have to go to my CSS and make a place for it. So I'm going to create that space right in line here, right below my chapter 2 flashlight selector. Stay put code. All right, hashtag, and then I'm going to paste in the selector that I just made, or the div ID that I just made. And then I'm going to grab all of that CSS code that I know I need again. So curly brace to curly brace, I want all of this. Copy from my previous page. Paste for this new page. And then the last step is I just need to get the unique URL web address for my last image here. So I'm going to get rid of all this green text from my previous image. That was the flashlight direct link. I now want to go to my matches image that I made here, chapter 2, the matches. Tap once, embed codes, direct links, copy. Go back to my CSS code here on REPL, and I paste this into the URL for my background image. Let's go test out the site. So we knew that flashlight works. You can only choose one, flashlight or some matches. Let's test, grab a box of matches. Beautiful. I still haven't changed any of the text on this page, so it still says chapter 1 and things like that, but it does look like my image at least is functioning for my next chapter here. So kind of a 3-step process, I'd call it. For each sub-page that you make, you need to create a unique div ID for your header section. They can't all be called header, because then they will all source the exact same image. Step 2 is you take whatever that name of your new div class is, and you label it in CSS, and then copy and paste all the commands that exist already, and swap out the URL, the web address for your new image by swapping out the text in green with the direct link to your image from ImageBB. It's not easy, but it's simple in process. Once you do 2 of them, you're going to be rolling. It should take you 1 or 2 minutes each once you get the hang of it. But just continue to test it out. Keep trying. Let me know if you have any questions. Good luck. That'll bring a lot of personality to each of your pages. And that'll be kind of the final steps to get all the way through the rest of the project. Good luck.